Right, well, as you can see, I'm Bob Crowder. You'll see that it started in 1976. And so in order to be organic in 1976, I suppose the strongest thing you had to have was that a philosophy based on organics, that there was something wrong with the existing paradigm. And unfortunately, there is still a lot of fault with the existing paradigm. But over the intervening 30 plus 40 years, we have in fact educated the New Zealand population and farmers and so on towards a much more biological approach to looking after the land. And it's and that is essentially what the BHU was set up to do. It started off as a result, I suppose, and I'm not going to talk too much now because this is part of my lecture series, of course, which I'll be giving you over the next few months, the history of the BHU and what promoted it and all the rest of it. But in the early 70s, there was a fuel crisis, an energy crisis that shook the world, far worse than anything we've had ever since. We used to have car sharing and carpooling in order to get out to Lincoln. We had carless days and all these type of things. And there was a tremendous boost in environmental research. Lincoln, for instance, did a lot of research on wind power, wind energy, and that is still really going forward with the wind energy project, which is actually close to bankruptcy at the present time. The development of the New Zealand prototype for wind power. But we also at that time were looking at Jerusalem artichokes for ethanol, sugar beet for ethanol, many aspects like this, methane gas digestion from farms. This all was stimulated, I suppose, by this world crisis in about 1974-75. And since that time, we've moved a lot. When I used to go to Britain in the 80s, I used to be quite a unique person because I used to talk about clover in pastures. And of course in Britain in those days, and for a long time, it was just grass. And you put on urea and so on in order to get grass growth. Unfortunately, in Europe, I was listening to a report from Europe just recently. And there, in Europe, of course, they're moving away from nitrogen in agriculture, whereas in New Zealand, you should be aware that we are still heading further and further into agriculture dependency on nitrogen applications. And that, of course, this is tied up with the lignite deposits in Southland that are going to be developed for urea production to enhance the dairy industry and exports all this kind of thing is going on now. And this is despite the fact that increasingly agriculture has accepted so many of the things that it laughed about back in 1976. Steve Ratton talks about biodiversity. Biodiversity was completely unknown in those days. And the BHU was established not just from a whim, but from people like yourself, who were students in horticulture mainly, who were very critical of the course structures back in those days, that they did not involve any environmental aspects of agricultural development. It didn't talk about compost. It didn't emphasize natural production whatsoever. And as a result of that, there was a lot of student radicalism at Lincoln, can you imagine? It was quite a phenomenon in those days, I can tell you. And unfortunately, I was the only person that listened to them. And it just so happened that the course structure at Lincoln in those days was a very enlightened, because the horticulture department at Lincoln has always kind of led change at Lincoln University. We introduced the unique concept of what we used to call a sandwich degree, based on an English model, where students of degrees went out into industry for 6 months at a time and got the experience of practicalities and also got the experience of business in 2 6-month courses. Very unique. And in order to run that course, I established, because I was in charge of the horticulture, particularly the first year horticulture degrees, I established a unit down in the BHU, which is now the BHU, which was the horticultural research unit, particularly for vegetable production, which I was the main person in charge. And because that was my patch, I let the students start composting, rotation, all the things that go with the organic system, courtesy of Soil and Health, the New Zealand Soil and Health Association. So that's basically how it started. Student radicalism, getting students to participate in the establishment of a system that they wanted to know more about. And we didn't, it wasn't a blank page. I had a very good degree student called John Calvert at the time, a brilliant degree student. And I set him a project way back in the 70s on the scientific justification of organic agriculture. And he came up with a brilliant review, lots of research, and it was from that research of one degree student that we basically had the scientific basis for establishing our concepts of what the BHU should be like. And what we wanted to do, when I say we, it's the students and the other people that were interested, which of course included much of the public of Christchurch through the various organic organisations, was how to grow naturally. Do you need any inputs? Or can you be sustainable and self-sufficient from within the confines of your boundary? And that's how we introduced the concept of biodiversity. We moved away from we didn't just concentrate on compost, we had to rebuild a landscape. Because many of you will know that Canterbury is probably the most sterile environment in New Zealand. Lolium and trifolium from horizon to horizon. Hardly any indigenous vegetation left whatsoever. And so, when you look around here, you'll see poplar shelter. We're going to look at this and talk about this a lot. But anyway, lack of biodiversity. So biodiversity became very important because the research from way back showed that you can use biodiversity to control pests and diseases. And that if you use these things, you can in fact have a sustainable and self-sufficient environment. That was the aim, that was the goal of the BHU back in the 1970s, with the help of students, radicalised students that realised that there was something wrong with the society we live in, and that we had to have a very different paradigm to work towards. And I look at you people, really, today, as those people that hopefully are going to be strong enough to radicalise our economic paradigm as well as our natural paradigm, because unfortunately at the moment, the organic paradigm cannot exist within the existing economic paradigm. And until we change our economic aspirations and how we want to live, etc., then we don't have much future if you look at all the evidence from all these United Nations reports, etc., which are flooding in now and which our government still ignores. And I have never yet heard any of our politicians back organic agriculture and environmental approaches to look how we run our society here. And if you go back in 1996, I was at the iPhone conference in Copenhagen, and I heard the Prime Minister of Denmark and the Minister of Agriculture of Denmark standing up and saying that Organics was the way that Denmark wanted to go. And that's what they were going to do. And of course, if you go to Denmark today, you will find that it does have one of the highest percentage organic land and agriculture in the world today, together with many other European states. And it also has a clever use, even back then, of wind power, wind energy. Not these great, monstrous 200 windmills all thrashing away on a hill somewhere, but little nests of 2, 3, 5 windmills on the edge of a village just to feed into the local community. That is a different way of thinking. And we've got to really consider these kind of things just as much as we are how we're going to adjust and work the land. So that's essentially what the BHU is all about. It's a legacy of student radicalism way back in the 70s that has carried through successfully till around about the mid-1990s, when the country lost its way even more amazingly. And now, thankfully, it has been revived, and we've got you here at a place called the Organic College, based on the BHU. So historically, it's quite an interesting area that you are inheriting. And I want to inspire you to actually take it to yourselves, because over those years of neglect, the decade before we got to the current millennium, it has deteriorated. There is a lot to do, and you can help by having some kind of input, more than just growing your vegetable plot or whatever it is, but looking at the infrastructure of the landscape around here and seeing how you can improve it and manage it. Because the land is to be managed to increase our ability to be able to survive from it. And you've got to think of this all the time. And now we're going to go for a brief walk around the area to point out some of these things and some of the problems and all the rest of it that we're going to have. So we will leave here and we'll walk down the main drag, which I just outside the ice.
Folks, I'll just get you to pick a number out of the pot. There you go.
Your thing. Yes, please.